Hello and welcome to Trip the Beltway Fantastic. This week, the Democratic Party faithful are gathered in Chicago to engage in the quadrennial ritual of formally nominating the presidential ticket, as well as whipping up support for their candidates in the homestretch of the election. No longer a forum for contest, the National Convention is a multi-million-dollar infomercial, not only for the candidates, but their policy agendas, strategic messaging, and especially in the modern arena, identity politics. We saw this at the Republican confab in July, and the Chicago event is no different. In Milwaukee, Donald Trump appeared after an assassination attempt, giving the proceedings a bit of a surreal tinge to the GOP's messaging of security in America first. For the DNC, everything seems to be geared towards saying goodbye to the old in the visage of Joe Biden, who up until this month was the party nominee, and hello to the new and fully politically rehabilitated VP Kamala Harris, whose official tagline now is "Don't look back." So, my friend James Carden, a writer and keen observer of Washington politics, is in Chicago this week and is taking a few minutes to talk to us about what he is seeing there, and more importantly, how Israel and foreign policy may be playing into the messaging and dynamics on the ground there. Thank you, James, for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. Good to be here.
Yeah, great to see you. So I know there's a lot to unpack here. I've covered the conventions in the past, but not recently, 2004 and 2008. And there was quite a bit of foreign policy at the time because of the Iraq war and the Afghanistan war. So that was interplaying quite a bit. And I know that Israel-Gaza is a huge issue, at least in the Democratic arena, because of the progressives and their demands for ceasefire, even arms embargo to Israel, and they're playing a role both outside and inside the Civic Center there. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen on the ground in terms of like the foreign policy, specifically Israel, maybe other issues, and do you feel like that is playing a big enough role, and how do you see it actually manifesting itself in the conversations and the speeches and all that?
It's not really. It's the great unmentionable.
Wow.
So I attended the protests on Monday. I think that the crowds were not quite as large as supporters were expecting. There was no violence. There was nothing ugly about it. I talked to a lot of people of all ages, people who came in from as far as the coasts, with Jewish Voices for Peace and other people. And the mood among the protesters is the exact opposite of the mood among the delegates. The protesters are pessimistic and resigned, being marginalized, and occasionally vilified by the mainstream media.
Yep.
The mood among the delegates, however, I went to a DNC donor event at the House of Blues last night. Amy Klobuchar gave a rousing speech, and a lot of congressmen and women were there, and the mood is like they've already won the election.
Yeah.
And then you bring up the great unmentionable, and you're the skunk at the garden party. They have no interest, and it's Harris's tagline, as you said, is "Don't look back." It also means don't look at Gaza. Don't look at this. So they can taste victory. They feel that Trump is in the process of imploding. They're probably right, but we're 70 some odd days.
That's right.
So that's a lot of time. So they are already, some of these people are already like measuring the drapes, at for their jobs, in the cabinet or whatever. So a lot of excitement among the delegates, a lot of kind of resigned pessimism on the street. And this morning I went to a press conference that was held outside of the United Center. Representative Omar was there, soon to be former Representative Cori Bush was there. Some very brave doctors from Doctors Without Borders, American doctors who went to Gaza to volunteer, and they spoke about their experiences. It was a very sparsely attended event.
Wow.
So it's, there's not a lot of momentum. There's not a lot of buy-in for things that we care about, which are
Right.
realism and restraint and peace, ethical, sane foreign policy. And it's even more grim when you attend some of these establishment foreign policy events as well.
I have to say, James, I totally know what you're saying, and the feelings that are being evoked here. I went to these conventions during the Iraq War, like I mentioned, and I, obviously was a strong opponent of the war. I was looking professionally at the time, to get that out. And so like I was writing for antiwar.com. I was writing for American Conservative in 2007 while doing my job at Fox News. And I was just so disappointed that everything that I was hearing inside these centers, whether it be on the floor or in the hallways outside, were just so uniformly pro-war, pro-status quo, establishmentarian. There was just no dissent on the wars and foreign policy in general. And it wasn't until I went to the alternate convention that Ron Paul was holding in 2008 that I felt like catharsis, because I was like, oh my God, these are normal people who are talking about, like the ugliness of the war and the failures of the counterinsurgency and everything. Cause I felt like I was in I was in Oz, like being around like party people. And it was both Republicans and Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Democratic convention disappointed me even more, because I knew that there were progressives that were against the war and they were speaking out on a daily basis, but those weren't the donors and the lobbyists and the media and the delegates and all that. It was just, it was hard to square. And yeah, it was disappointing, and it was exhausting too, being around all of these blobby people all of the time. Do you get a sense that because Kamala was nominated and replaced Joe at the top of the ticket, that a lot of the energy for the ceasefire and the demands and the uncommitted or non-committed campaign, that energy kind of dissipated because there's more hope that Kamala will be different?
I think so, but I think that they're wrong. There's very little evidence that Kamala is going to be different. And she's been very clear about that. So it's really a case of maybe hope over experience. But
right.
You spoke about the Blob. I mean, the Blob is in full control here. I attended a event by the very good Chicago Council on Global Affairs. They had a panel, and they featured former National Security Advisor Susan Rice, a couple of ambassadors, and Senator Chris Van Hollen, who, given the low bar that is set for, Congress people, is, not bad. Again, he mentioned very briefly what was going on in Palestine. Rice avoided it completely. For the time I was there, I only lasted about 40 minutes, and I had to excuse myself because it was just so depressing.
Yeah.
I mean, Rice kicked things off by sounding like a NatCon. She went right for China. She went right for the old democracy versus autocracy framework. And these are all, high-level Democrats who served in the Biden and Obama administrations.
Right.
And everyone was nodding in agreement that, so I guess both parties are in agreement that we have to wage a two-front Cold War against Russia and China in the coming years, and perhaps send our sons and daughters to fight and die for Taiwan. So, and the moderator, who's a smart guy, he's the president of the council, Ivo Dodler, who was the ambassador to NATO during the Obama administration. He gave Rice the floor at one point. Like, pick any topic that you want to talk. What should we really be focusing on? So she takes a beat, thinks about it, and she goes, "Artificial intelligence."
Oh my
so,
goodness! The go-to.
That's when I took my leave. I'm like, this is pointless. Yeah. So that's basically where they are. They are. There's no interest in standing up to the lobby, to Netanyahu, and this thing is going to go on. So if you're a opponent of American support for the Israeli slaughter that is unfolding, you have no good options, perhaps, except for Cornel West. Kennedy is horrible. Trump you can't trust on the issue, and the Democrats have made it very clear where they stand. So
it is very depressing, I have to say.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
I said I wish I had better news to report from Chicago.
No, I mean, you're giving me flashbacks of when I was at this thing in 2004 and 2008. And I remember, was it 2008? When did Kerry? Was it Kerry 2004? Yeah. When he stood up there and he's like, "John Kerry reporting for duty." And I'm like, oh God, this thing is not going in a good direction. I got my little pad on. I'm like, oh no. Yeah. Because basically what the Democrats were trying to do at that time was be as hawkish on defense and the war as the Republicans. They didn't want to look like they were anti-war or were shirking, that somehow that they weren't rising to the occasion, which meant where you have the Republicans at the time were so hawkish that you had people like Arnold Schwarzenegger standing up there talking about how we need to go and, he was just full bore. Rudy Giuliani, you can't even imagine what it was like in 2004 in New York City for their convention, because they specifically picked it because of 9/11. So you had a real high bar in terms of trying to match the outrageous interventionism and hyperbole that was going on there on the Republican side. And they tried their hardest, but that meant there was just no room for dissent whatsoever.
Yeah.
What bothers me the most is that when you look at the Democratic platform and you look at what Phil Gordon had put out a few weeks ago. He's the top advisor of Kamala Harris, top foreign policy guy, national security. I don't know his exact, you've written about this, his exact title, but first of all, they're all backward looking and they're living in some weird dream state where they don't acknowledge, like you say, the actual conflicts that are going on. They just talk about things like, oh, well, we'll be restoring our tradition of diplomacy, and talking about how diplomacy will always be our first tool in the toolkit. We'll be reinventing and rebuilding and reinforcing our alliances. Trump did all these awful things, but we're going to restore our global leadership.
Right.
And it's
America, the world looks to America. That's what some of the panelists were saying.
Yeah, the world looks to America, right. And it completely ignores reality. What is the reality? The reality is, as the Biden administration came in January 2021 saying the exact same things. So you can take this platform and you can take what Phil Gordon was saying and then transpose it onto whatever Jake Sullivan was saying about pursuing a foreign policy for the middle class, whatever the the moniker was at the time, but then ignoring the fact that the world is on fire. And you have the Ukraine war, which we have not taken any leadership on, despite what Biden is saying. We care nothing about diplomacy in that conflict. Ukraine is imploding no matter what they say, and are not going to be in any better place to come to any diplomatic resolution in that war. Then you have Israel, Gaza, which we have refused to use any leverage to end that war. And then the China situation is we've engaged in this weird passive aggressivism for the last 3.5 years, in which we take one step forward with reaching out and being diplomatic, and then 2 steps back when we, slap tariffs or restrictions or all these exclusionary policies. And then doing all this hedging with our partners in the region and putting our military assets in there and constantly running right up to the line of aggression and escalation. And I'm thinking, wow, so like we're not supposed to talk about that at all. Let's talk about AI.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Gordon. Gordon's Harris's national security advisor, and I'm staring at the tweet right now. On August 8th, here's what he tweeted. At VP has been clear. She will always ensure Israel is able to defend itself against Iran and Iran-backed terrorist groups. She does not support an arms embargo on Israel. She will continue to work to protect civilians in Gaza and to uphold international humanitarian law. I don't know what international humanitarian law he's talking about, but
right.
You can't do both, right? So, I mean, stuff like that is just, it's worse than worthless. I mean, it's basically sinister, because basically the implication is that, in the absence of Iran, there wouldn't be, an opposition to Israeli apartheid. And I keep it, it's almost like deja vu from 2020. Around this time, there were a lot of reports coming out in like establishment organs like Politico saying that, this time, when Biden wins, progressives are going to really, they're going to get a shot and they're going to have a say. And, it's going to be great. And, we're going to make Matt Duss national security advisor and blah, blah, blah. And the same stuff's coming out now. Oh, we have a real chance with Kamala.
Oh, my goodness.
Worthless.
Yeah. And let's go back to that tweet for a second and like just parse it out. So the first part about Iran, that is like a sop to all of the anti-Iranian folks, typically your pro-Israel hawkish types within the Democratic orbit, who are basically telling her, you need to be tough on Iran. Then you have this bit about we defend Israel. And that's obviously she doesn't want to go crosswise with the pro-Israel donors who are among Biden's top donors. I imagine they've all shifted over to Kamala. So she's got to be mindful of that. And then you get this third thing where she says she will continue to support humanitarian, aid or the
international, to work to protect civilians in Gaza and to uphold international humanitarian law.
Yeah. And I think the word continue is key here, because sorry, it's not happening.
Yeah.
So as much as they say that talking and shuttling, and Blinken, Secretary of State Blinken, shuttling back and forth and talking about a ceasefire, talking about getting more aid into Gaza, talking about getting polio vaccines in and building a pier for military to come in. As much as they talked about that, it's not happening.
Yep.
So the word continue is doing a lot of work there. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what makes me the most angry, because they're trying to get credit for something that's not happening. And that's why there are protesters outside, because it's not happening. Yep. Like 40,000 people are dead and starving, and we're not even getting food in there anymore, much less stopping the bombs.
Yep, exactly. And like to hear the stories that these doctors were telling today, it's, it's heartbreaking. I mean, it's mortifying. And, we continue $20 billion. Anthony Blinken and Biden just pushed through a $20 billion arms sale package to Israel to defend itself. Really? No, it's just,
as our bombs are raining down on civilians that supposedly Kamala is continuing to serve and help.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry to laugh because it's not funny. It's so gruesome and outrageous and despicable what's happening. And what bothers me is like what I'm hearing, and even our own conversation, is that the issue of the Palestinian civilians and Gaza itself has shifted over to like the fringes of the Democratic Party, like literally outside the door of the convention. And it shouldn't be. This should be an issue that everyone in America should care about. And so if you're on the right, they have been convinced that you have to be so pro-Israel as to close your eyes and think every protester is a Hamas terrorist or supporter of Hamas terrorism. And on the left, if you want Kamala to win, you got to just ignore this issue and just leave it to the protesters. They'll have their little thing outside and they'll make a big noise. But overall, we just need to like move on.
Yep.
And like, so where does that leave the Palestinians? Where does that leave humanity? Again, at the fringes.
Yeah, absolutely out of luck. And I think that the rhetoric coming from the right is just absurd and insulting to everyone's intelligence. I on Fox the other night, I think it was Monday night, they're referring to the protesters as terrorist sympathizers, Hamas sympathizers. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's disgusting. It is disgusting. And I get newsflash, everybody. Israel is not our friend. They don't act like friends. They don't act like allies. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, what happened to America first? I mean, that's what I want to ask Donald Trump and JD Vance. And I mean, I'm honest. Honest to goodness, if I had them in front of me, I'd say, what about America first? Please explain to me how it is in America's interest to continue to fuel this this war, which is actually turning the Middle East into a tinderbox. Okay, it could explode. This could explode into a wider war at any moment. And B, even Israel may not survive as a state beyond what's happening now. So how is that in our best interest to keep encouraging that? And I want to hear what they have to say. JD Vance will say something squishy like they're our security allies and we work together with them and other Arab nations to keep everything, contained and keep Iran contained. That's what they always say. But really, are we keeping it contained? Is this containment that you're seeing here? Because right now I feel like we're on the edge and I feel like it's 10 times worse than it even was 10 years ago.
Well, they're also a democracy, Kelly, remember. And democracies automatically deserve our money and our undying support.
Yeah. And what bothers me most is the hypocrisies. And the hypocrisies are occurring on both sides. So it's like on one side, we're supposed to like the Blinken and the rest of them are calling out Russian atrocities, Russian war crimes. The minute something happens, even before they even know whose missile hit what, they're calling out, they're supporting complaints and charges and at the International Criminal Court. But when it comes to Israel, well, we don't know exactly what happened. We're not lawyers. We can't determine what's war crimes or not. We'll have to let them investigate themselves. And then the right is doing the same. They talk about like how, everything we do in terms of fueling the war in Ukraine is putting us on an escalatory spiral, and that it's not in America's best interest to continue ramping up and crossing red lines and whatnot. Israel does it, and it's like, hey, they're just defending themselves. We have no say in it.
Yeah.
But we know what's going on there. I mean, the Israeli lobby is so powerful. I couldn't talk to you about this openly on YouTube, 10 years ago and not have been fired from a job. So I think things are getting somewhat better in which we can sit here and we can openly criticize what's going on. But we see how this manifests itself on Capitol Hill and in the White House, where they're so afraid to do anything to use the leverage, so to speak, that we have against Israel and make them mad at us.
Yeah. So that's all about the money. It's all about the money.
It's all about the money. So I would imagine it doesn't look like from the schedule that there's going to be any national security theme or foreign policy theme over the next couple nights. And if people are tuning in, we're recording this on Wednesday of the convention. I looked at the schedule, didn't see anything that's going to shout out. I think there's something about rights and reproductive rights today, and tomorrow Harris gives her big speech. So yeah, we're not expecting much, huh?
No, not at all. And, credit where it's due. They have done a masterful job patching up, camouflaging the differences. I mean, you wouldn't know it, but, between, June 30th, I think that's when the debate was. So from like June 30th, the whole month of July, there was a civil war going on inside the Democratic Party. And really, there was an effort, and this hasn't really been reported on too much, but there was really an effort by Pelosi and Obama to not only push out Biden, but to push out Harris as well.
Yeah, I remember that. I mean, it was just yesterday.
Now, it's kumbaya, and they've really rallied the troops, and they are going to run. I think, it makes sense from an electoral standpoint. They are really going to run hard on reproductive rights. And that makes sense because even Republican women that I've spoken to are not on board with Trump Vance and that. So, no, foreign policy is absolutely an afterthought, if at all.
Yeah. And for good reason in terms of like political strategy. They don't want to remind people of what's going on in Gaza right now, unless by some miracle, which is not going to happen, they get a ceasefire before the election or even sooner the way they want.
Yeah.
They don't want to remind people that they've fallen down on the job. They don't want to remind people that they built a pier that broke and that they haven't been able to get humanitarian aid. When Biden stood up at his State of the Union and said not only would he make humanitarian aid a priority, but getting the hostages home, American hostages home, a priority. And they won't talk about any of that. They don't want to remind people that this is all unfinished business. They don't want to remind people that there's still a war going on in Ukraine. So yeah, I'm not surprised that foreign policy is not playing a bigger role here. It's just depressing from our standpoint when I don't care. I want I do vote on foreign policy. I'm one of those weirdos out there. And because I feel like what happens abroad affects us here, as we saw with the Iraq war, when you have these military interventionism, empire building, it always comes home to hurt people in terms of like their own freedoms here in the United States. We see that with the surveillance of Americans and all sorts of crazy things that happen with the global war on terror. So it matters to me. And so like, I want the best person on this issue to win. And I just get a sense like both would be like failures at that. I'm not getting any confidence from either side. And so, yeah, I know why they're taking the approach they are. It's just, it's not going to help us.
Yeah. I mean, there was a Russian saying that my friend Stephen Cohen used to say all the time, and it's both are worst. And that's where we are. Both are worst.
That's where we are. And, I want to give you a lot of credit, James, because you're writing for the American Conservative as well as The Nation. Now, we caveat the American Conservative is one of the few conservative magazines out there that
That's readable.
have been non-interventionist and great on foreign policy since its founding by Pat Buchanan in 2002. But still, I mean, you're writing for a conservative audience when you write for them, and you're writing for a liberal progressive audience when you write for the Nation. But I think, to me, that kind of shows that there is a hunger for dissident approaches to foreign policy, alternatives, independent thinking on both sides. But I feel like when it comes time for these conventions and elections, it's like the space just is shrinking. The oxygen is dissipating from our world, and it's harder and harder to get out there. I'm thankful for your writing.
Well, thank you, and I'm grateful for the work you do at Responsible Statecraft, because there's nothing really like it. So
we're trying our best. It's a tough time. Before we go, let's just talk about just for a second RFK, because he has been a disaster on Israel Gaza, and I know he lost a lot of support because of that. It sounds like this week his running mate Nicole Shanahan has suggested they might drop out and endorse, or not, or maybe just drop out and not endorse Trump, or both. But there seems to be some thinking that him staying in the race is hurting Trump, which I think some of the polls bear that out. What are your thoughts on your disappointment that there hasn't been a third party candidate that actually emerged to be a standard bearer for restraint outside of the Jill Stein or Cornel West?
Like a year ago, I was one of these people who tried to fool myself into thinking that Kennedy was kind of an answer. And it became pretty clear that campaign is really little more than a grift to enrich his daughter-in-law and his family. Kennedy is what he has always been, which is bananas. So it would be irresponsible to put someone like that in the Oval Office. He's horrible on, he makes some sense when he speaks about NATO expansion and the war in Ukraine, but he's horrible on Middle East policy. And I've said that for a long time, that he would draw from Trump. There was never any question in my mind that was going to happen. So that would be a good thing for the Trump campaign.
Yeah, it would be.
If he dropped out. I'm not sure, if it's good for the country, but it would be good for the Trump campaign for sure.
Well, I guess we'll see what happens. I know that Trump is making a speech right now, supposedly on national security. I'm eager to hear if he has any more specifics, because he's been pretty vague. He's touched on the familiar notes of, the European countries need to spend more. The NATO countries need to step up, burden sharing and whatnot. I'll end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. But in terms of Gaza, Israel, all he says is Israel needs to just finish it. And then he talks about anti-Semitism, but he's been very vague on that. I have some theories that we don't need to go into right now as to why. But I would love to hear more about how he plans on ending these wars and, getting NATO members to pay more. And we'll see. And maybe we'll have another show on that. But I feel like he's been coasting on just his usual talking points, and would love to hear more. But hey, that's another disappointment across around the corner, I'm afraid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he surrounded himself with really, really bad advisors, and the few good advisors that he had are not really in the picture. So I think, it's unfortunate. I don't particularly want to send, our kids to fight for Taiwan because Bridge Colby thinks it's a good idea.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's a real mixed bag of advisors on the right now, and some of them I would love to see if there is a Trump administration, those pushed forward, and then there are others who are throwbacks to Cold War neocon days that will just it'll be a replay of the first Trump administration. So, well, I look forward to seeing what you write on the DNC. Best of luck on getting through the next couple of days covering this event. And I mean, really appreciate you spending some time talking with me about it.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always good to talk.
Thanks, James.